The dusty plain stretched wide beneath the burning sun, shimmering in waves that blurred the horizon into a golden haze, and somewhere along the narrow dirt road that cut between open fields, a young woman clutched the reins of a frightened chestnut mare that had bolted without warning, her hair streaming behind her like a wild banner, her cries torn from her lips and swallowed into the hot wind, while the hooves thundered and the beast reared in a panic that spoke of shadows and old fears only. Horses seemed to know. She pulled hard, begging the animal to slow, her voice breaking, her body straining to keep balance, as the saddle jolted and threatened to throw her clean off. And though she had ridden many times before, nothing in her life had prepared her for the raw terror of a runaway horse. Just beyond, near the fence line where cattle grazed lazily under the watchful eye of a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy, Colt Maverick's gaze sharpened as he caught the sight of danger unraveling before him, the desperate figure clinging for her life, the mare frothing at the mouth and tearing through, the earth like a storm unchained. Colt was a man of quiet strength. His days lived in sweat and grit, but his heart had never hardened to fear in another's eyes, and without hesitation he dropped the rope he had been coiling, his boots digging deep into the soil as he sprinted across the open land, his every stride pounding with urgency, his mind calculating distance, timing, and the one chance he had to make a difference. The mare's hooves pounded closer, kicking up dirt, its flaring nostrils wild, its eyes rolling white, while the young woman's fingers slipped on the reins, her body swaying dangerously with each buck of the animal. And when the inevitable came, when her strength finally gave way and her small frame was hurled skyward, Colt lunged like a man possessed, diving beneath the falling arc of her body, arms wide, his chest braced for impact, and in that split second, fate aligned. She crashed into him with a force that knocked the breath from his lungs, but his arms tightened instinctively, absorbing the fall, rolling with her across the ground until dust and earth rose in a cloud around them, leaving both shaken but alive, his protective grip never faltering. For a long moment the world fell still, the runaway mare already galloping into the distance, the only sound the gasping breaths of two souls who had just collided with life itself. And as she blinked up at him, tears streaking her dust-covered cheeks, he saw not just fear but the raw vulnerability of someone who had nearly lost everything in an instant. "You're safe now," Colt whispered, his voice low, steady, carrying the weight of reassurance that felt like a lifeline, and she, trembling in his arms, found herself clinging to the solid strength of him, her heart pounding not only from fear but from something deeper, something unexpected that ignited in the space between near death and salvation. Her name was Clara Whitfield, daughter of a respected ranch owner's brother, a woman who had lived much of her life under watchful expectations, admired for her grace but rarely trusted with her own freedom, and today had been the first time she dared take the mare out without supervision, hungry for the taste of independence, craving the wind against her face. Yet now, as she lay caught in the embrace of the cowboy who had appeared like a guardian out of nowhere, her rebellion had ended in disaster, and shame crept alongside her gratitude. I thought I could handle her," she stammered. Her voice cracked, but Colt only shook his head gently, brushing the dust from her hair with a hand rough from rope and leather. "Ain't about handling," he said quietly, his eyes locking with hers, deep and steady like the earth itself. "It's about knowing when to let someone ride with you. No one makes it through storms alone." Those words struck deeper than she expected, awakening in Clara, a reminder of how often she had been alone even in a house full of kin, how much she longed for someone who saw her, not as fragile porcelain but as flesh, heart, and soul. He helped her to her feet slowly, his arm steady at her waist, and though she tried to stand on her own, her legs trembled, betraying the shock still rippling through her body. So he stayed close, his presence like a wall against the world's harsh edges. Together they walked toward the shade of an old oak, the sun breaking through leaves in dappled light that seemed to soften everything, and there she finally let herself breathe, pressing a hand to her chest as if to calm the wild rhythm inside. Colt crouched in front of her, his hat pushed back, his brow damp with sweat, but his gaze never wavered, filled with a kind of concern that carried no judgment, only truth. "Reckless or not, you're still standin'. That's what matters," he told her, and though she wanted to argue, to defend her decision, she found herself swallowing words she thought she'd say, because for once she wanted to listen, and yet behind the calm of his tone, Clara sensed something else, a man who had carried others before, who knew what it meant to catch someone falling not just from horses, but from life itself. There was history in his eyes, stories of loss and resilience woven into the steel of his frame, and she wondered what storms he had endured to be the kind of man who dove without hesitation to save another. Time passed slower then, stretched by the lingering closeness between them, the awareness that life had turned a page the moment their paths collided, and in the silence, their breathing synced. Two strangers now bound by an act of raw courage. Finally, Clara whispered, "Thank you," her voice trembling with sincerity, and Colt's lips curved just slightly, the faintest hint of a smile that said more than words ever could. The day would move on. The mare would be retrieved, her family would scold her. Recklessness, but something had shifted in that field, something neither Colt nor Clara could undo, for she had felt what it meant to be caught, not just physically, but in spirit, and he had found in her a reminder of why he never stopped, running toward danger, because sometimes saving someone else meant saving a piece of yourself. And as they stood there, the wind carrying away the last echoes of the horse's frantic gallop, Clara realized this was not the end of a terrifying moment, but the beginning of a story yet unwritten, one where the cowboy who dove and caught her might just be the one who taught her how to truly live free. So to every viewer watching this story unfold, remember that life will always throw storms, runaway horses, and moments where it feels like the ground beneath you is about to give way. But somewhere out there is a hand willing to catch you if you fall, someone who will dive without fear to keep you safe. And just as Colt reminded Clara, none of us were meant to face the hardest rides alone. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of courage, love, and the unexpected beauty of being caught when you least expect it, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Because here we tell stories that stir the heart, stories that remind us that even in the wildest rides, hope, love, and second chances are waiting. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Subscribe now and let's ride together into more tales that lift the spirit and make you believe in the power of being caught in someone's arms. The days that followed the runaway horse incident were painted in softer shades for Clara Whitfield, though her ribs still ached from the jarring fall and her family's scolding lingered like a sting she couldn't quite shake. Yet none of that weighed as heavily on her heart as the memory of Colt Maverick's arms catching her in that moment between life and death, the way his eyes had locked with hers as if to tether her spirit back to the earth when fear had tried to steal it away. She couldn't explain why. But every quiet hour of the evening when the sun sank low over the ranch house and the cicadas began their hymn, she found her thoughts wandering back to him, to his steady voice, his hands that bore the rough marks of honest work yet had cradled her with a gentleness she had never known from men who claimed to care for her. And in those private reflections, Clara began to realize that what had felt like an accident might have been something far more, an intersection of fate, a door she hadn't known she wanted to open. Colt, for his part, went about his days as he always had, tending cattle, fixing fences, riding the outer lines of the property. But no matter how much he tried to lose himself in labor, the image of Clara clinging to him refused to fade. He had caught many things in his life: stray calves tangled in brush, colts gone wild, even men who stumbled drunk from saloons. But catching her had been different, not because of the risk, but because of the way she had looked at him afterward, as though he had not just saved her body, but touched something far more hidden, something fragile she rarely revealed. The small town buzzed with whispers soon enough, because nothing stayed secret long where dirt roads crisscrossed and tongues wagged over fences, and Clara's kin, proud of their name and wary of outsiders, were quick to warn her that a cowboy like Colt was just a ranch hand with no place in a family like theirs. But those words slid off her spirit like water on stone, because she knew what she had felt in that field when his voice steadied her trembling. She knew it was more real than all the polished courtesies of suitors her uncle had paraded before her in town. It was one late afternoon when their paths crossed again, not by accident this time, but by the subtle pull of unfinished business. For Clara had walked the fence line alone, basket in hand as if gathering wildflowers, though her heart sought more than blossoms. And Colt, riding back from checking the west pasture, spotted her silhouette against the gold of the setting sun. His first instinct was to keep riding, to protect them both from the sparks he already felt. But when she turned and their eyes met, he knew there was no denying the current between them. "You shouldn't be out here alone after what happened," he called, his tone carrying that same quiet authority that had steadied her before. But Clara only smiled, lifting her chin with the kind of defiance that masked longing. "And yet," she replied softly, "I knew you'd find me." The simplicity of her words hit him harder than a hammer against iron, because she was right. Whether by choice or by some force larger than them, he would always find her. He dismounted, boots sinking into the soft earth, and as he walked toward her, the space between them thickened with a silence alive with possibility. When he reached her, she held out a small cluster of wildflowers, trembling just slightly in her hand. "For you," she whispered. And though Colt had been given many things in life, trust, burdens, responsibility, he could not recall ever being given something so simple, so pure, and it moved him more than he dared admit. "Why me, Clara?" he asked after a long pause, his eyes searching hers, trying to understand the reason she, a woman born into comfort, would look at him, a man of dust and labor, with such intensity. She met his gaze without flinching. "Because you didn't think," she said, her voice steady. "You didn't weigh the risks, or what people might say or what you might lose. You just caught me. And no one's ever done that for me before. Not really." Her confession stripped something raw inside him, reminding him of the loneliness he had carried since boyhood, the weight of always being the one to catch others, never the one to be caught, and for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what it would mean to let someone like Clara see past the armor he wore. He reached out then slowly, his calloused fingers brushing hers as he accepted the flowers, and the touch lingered, sparking warmth that spread through both of them. The world seemed to hold its breath in that moment. The sky painted in strokes of crimson and gold, the earth humming with the quiet song of crickets. And when Colt finally spoke, his words carried the gravity of a vow. "If you fall again, Clara, I'll always be there. Not just from horses, from anything." She smiled then, tears brimming in her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. And for the first time in years, she felt seen, felt safe, not because he promised perfection, but because he promised presence. They walked back together under the fading light, her hand slipping into his like it had always belonged there, and though the path ahead would be marked with resistance, from her family's disapproval, from the harsh judgment of a small town, from the fears they both carried within, the seed had already been planted, and no amount of scorn could uproot what had begun between them, for love born in moments of danger often grows roots deeper than anyone can understand, because it is tested in fire before it has even had the chance to bloom. And so, dear listeners, remember this. Life will throw you into storms. It will hurl you from runaway horses you never meant to mount, and sometimes it will leave you bruised, broken, and warned by voices who do not understand your heart. But there is always a chance that someone will be there to catch you, not just once, but again and again. Someone who will remind you that safety is not in cages of expectation, but in arms that promise to never let go. If this chapter touched you, if it stirred something in your spirit, then I ask you, don't just let this story end here. Subscribe to this channel. Join this journey where love, courage, and redemption live in every word we share. And let's walk together into the next tale, where maybe, just maybe, the cowboy and the girl who defied the world for each other will show us all what it truly means to be caught by love.